Welcome back to Beyond the Reformer, the podcast for everybody who loves Pilates. I'm Nick Lenny, and what's been amazing over these past few months is seeing who's actually listening. Because it's not just teachers and studio owners, it's also clients too. I've had so many messages from people who've never even thought about teaching before, and they've been saying that these conversations have really inspired them to train. And some of them have even joined my 2026 teacher training program, which has honestly blown me away. My 2026 comprehensive program sold out in a couple of weeks, and I've just launched a shorter Reformer Plus teacher training program in Bristol, and this starts in February. It's been so much fun writing this course and really thinking what's needed to create the very best teachers who can teach with the depth that so many of the guests we've had on the podcast have talked about. A little bit about my last couple of weeks, really. I've been really unwell for the last couple of weeks. The kind of virus that completely floors you, this never happens to me. And it's funny because I'm always on here talking about listening to your body. But when you run a business, you've now got a podcast, you've got 2 children, a dog, and all the things. You've got a teacher training weekend that you've got to run. And I even had a photo shoot in the mix. I mean, truly switching off isn't always an option, is it? And I'm sure many of you understand that. And I did rest as much as I could, but it definitely wasn't the kind of switch everything off and lie on the sofa recovery that most people imagine or kept telling me that I had to do. I don't know if any of that resonates with any of you, that tension between knowing what your body needs and what your responsibilities demand. But it's really made me reflect on what I can do to slow down, try and pay attention in a deeper way, and which makes today's guest feel even more aligned. Today, I'm speaking with someone whose work sits right at the heart of what we talk about on this podcast: movement, real bodies, resilience, and helping people live the lives that they want. Dana Karen Ciccone, or DK, is a Pilates teacher, a movement specialist, chronic pain educator, and the author of You're Meant to Move, a book that completely reframes how we think about pain, stress, and what it means to have an active life. What I love about DK is the way she blends science, compassion, and practicality. She spent decades helping people who've been told, don't move or be careful, to reclaim their confidence. In today's episode, we're going to talk about pain, fear, resilience, the power of the words that we use in our teaching, and how we can create spaces where every client and everybody feels welcome to move. Whether you're a teacher, a studio owner, or just someone who's curious about their own body, I think you'll take so much from this conversation. So let's get into it. DK, it is amazing to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Super happy to be here. Thank you.
And you sent me your book, You're Meant to Move. I've got it here. And I love that title because it challenges so much of what people in pain think about themselves so often. What does this phrase, you're meant to move, mean to you? And why did you write this book?
So the title itself, it really comes from, like you're saying, this kind of, I think, mantra that a lot of us who were in chronic pain were told, which is that rest is best. And in fact, it turns out that the body is both willing to and capable of adapting to all kinds of changes, and it really responds well to movement. And ultimately, I think there's sort of this underlying feeling that I think a lot of people have, that you're either were born to be a mover or you weren't born to be a mover. It's nice for those people over there who like to do exercise, but that's just not my thing. And it turns out my body just doesn't want it. And the reality is everyone's body wants to move in some way. And we all respond physiologically really well to movement. And so I wanted folks who are in pain or who feel sort of excluded in traditional health and wellness spaces to recognize that there is a path to movement for them, even if it's not, cookie cutter what they might sort of think they're supposed to be doing from marketing purposes. Why I wrote the book is because I am only one person with a small studio, and I work mostly privately with people who have chronic pain or chronic conditions. And I just felt like I wished I could reach many more people. I think for my own processing of my story with chronic pain, it was just really cathartic to have this writing project to kind of put it down on paper. And also because, as a Pilates teacher who's sort of in that clinical adjacent space, it's very difficult to open up the right conversations, I find, to kind of be considered a legitimate provider. And so I also wanted something that would help open doors, to be honest with you, and having access to the populations who would benefit the most.
I think it's really interesting what you said around movement and around exercise and what people might think about that. Like, people will say to me quite often, "Oh, you're really sporty."
Yeah.
I'm not really sporty at all. I never was really sporty. I found my understanding of what exercise was as a child and a teenager was very much that exercise was sport, and usually competitive group sport. And what I've learned in my life is that I am a really good learner, but I'm not necessarily a natural at anything, including sport. And I think at school, I think PE's changed a little bit, but PE for me, physical education for me was very much, here's a ball, go and play netball. Here's a ball, go and do basketball. There was no sort of techniques and being taught. So I definitely felt like I am not sporty. And it's funny how you sort of said about how there's just different types of movement out there. And often it's just getting people to understand. So, where did movement first come into your life, DK? What's your story?
So I had a similar sort of relationship with phys ed classes in particular. So I don't know what it's like in the UK, but in the States, or at least in the state I grew up in New York, you had to do these physical fitness tests. And I always did absolutely horribly on them. And was usually, I was like the tall, kind of awkward kid. I sprout up really early. So movement for me did begin as a dancer. I was obsessed with dancing. I used to watch musicals with my grandmother. And so I got really into, Broadway style dancing and tap dancing. And I guess movement was a part of my life in that regard, although I was always terrible at actual organized sports, as you said. And then I didn't find Pilates until I know these days dancers kind of they hear about Pilates a lot sooner, but I didn't learn about it until my mid 20s after I herniated a disc in my lumbar spine and was in a lot of pain and was trying to find a pathway back to movement and really hadn't danced or done much of anything in a really long time. And Pilates was a way of healing my relationship with my body at that time.
So, you hurt your disc in your teens?
I think it's unlikely that the disc was injured in my teenage years. I did start having really intense low back pain during performance. I was 13 going on 14 and I was in a performance and had like debilitating pain all of a sudden. That kind of put me out of commission for a few days. And that kept happening to me. I, to this day, don't really understand what was going on at that time. More than 10 years later, I did have another super severe episode that led to an MRI scan, which found a disc herniation. So I'm not certain if that was there or, had happened in that time. It's a little bit unclear.
And so, from reading your story in your book, and honestly, the book is a really easy read. And I mean that in the best way, because a lot of books we get as Pilates teachers, like, you can't read them before bed. They're too heavy. This is a really nice story, your story and your experience around it. And you talk about how the pain then got in the way of dance and your
Mhm.
belief in your body.
Yes. I mean, I think that for me, being on stage and dancing was where I felt like myself. I was sort of an awkward kid, as I said. I was an only child. I didn't have a ton of friends. There was something about being in that space, in the theater space, I felt really alive. And so, having that kind of ripped away from me was really difficult. I mean, I had every plan in the world of going on to star on Broadway. I mean, little did I know it was a really competitive field. I probably wouldn't have actually made it, but I had dreams. And so, it was definitely, difficult to come face to face with kind of this great love of my life being taken away because it was so unpredictable. And then you kind of end up in this cycle of feeling like your own body is your enemy, right? Because you're like, I just want you to show up. I just want you to do this thing I'm asking you to do with consistency, and you just keep not being there when I need you. And it would happen, right before a performance or in the middle or after or just out of nowhere. And so I just felt like I couldn't rely on it anymore.
And you talk about in your book, you then kind of created a belief system around what you thought caused the pain. Is that what you see? You saw in yourself, but then as you started to look into this more, that you have started to see that people have real beliefs about why they are in pain and things that they do that cause their pain?
So I certainly didn't have any awareness of that at the time. Part of writing this book, which was kind of a gift to myself, is that the experience of working with clients was forcing me to process my own relationship with my body and pain. And so I was as much learning about myself through the process of as I was starting to become a Pilates teacher and was really interested in focusing on working with people who, just had complex things going on in their bodies. I didn't in my initial days really like hone in on pain, but I liked taking the cases that other teachers didn't want to take of somebody who had, an injury or, a complex surgical thing going on. And as I was working with people and having to educate myself to make sure I was equipped to actually help them, I was learning all this pain science stuff. And it was making me kind of reflect back on my own internal narratives. And so it was a learning process from internally and also in with clients for their own individual stories. I feel like I learned as much about myself as they were learning about themselves. And yes, 100%. I mean, especially for people who have gone through something kind of traumatic. Sometimes chronic pain comes up out of nowhere, but a lot of times you had an injury or you had a surgery or something went wrong. And then the pain that would have traditionally, healed and then you moved on for whatever reason, the pain itself sticks around, even though the tissues have healed. I think that is sort of more known in the world now than maybe it was 10 years ago. That whole idea, that sort of cognitive dissonance between understanding that your body is actually fundamentally safe and healthy, but you are just at the same time experiencing discomfort and trying to sit with those two things was very challenging. And I see people go through that all of the time. And it's a huge part of the path towards being able to actually move through the pain and get back to the life of movement that you really ultimately want.
So you said you didn't discover Pilates as a dancer, you discovered it later. How did it make your body feel? Was this something that you just felt really good like immediately, or, what was the story there with Pilates?
Yeah, so I was 26, I think, and I had been trying to move again after that herniation, as I mentioned, and was just really struggling. I was working a corporate job at the time. I had books stacked on my desk because I couldn't bear to sit down and they didn't have standing desks. And, I was really just miserable. And so one of my friends said, I heard Pilates is good for backs. That was about all the information that I had. So I signed up for a mat class. I don't like believe in love at first sight or anything like that, but I really just felt like as soon as the movements were in my body, that it just felt like coming home to something. And I felt like there was this all over engagement of my muscles. There was, just the right amount of range of motion that kind of made me feel like I'd limbered up, but that I wasn't getting into a, danger area. And I felt relief. And so I just kept going back. I was really obsessed at that point, and it was really only mat for me from 2007 to, I don't know, 2013 or 14 when I signed up for mat class around Christmas time, and the studio I was at the time was like, "You know what? We don't have enough people sign up for mat. We're sticking you in the reformer class." And I was like, "Ugh. Don't put me in the reformer class. I want my mat class." And then I took reformer and I said, "Oh, well this is special." And then, a few years later I became a teacher. So,
And what was the kind of catalyst that got you thinking about doing teaching? Did you have that feeling of like, this has done this for my body, I want to do this for more people?
becoming a teacher had more to do with the fact that I hit sort of a wall in my own professional career where I was getting no fulfillment out of it, and my body was really unhappy. I was having lots of back flare ups again. And, ultimately my own analysis of this whole journey, like as I talk about in the book, is that really it's a matter of anxiety. I think that that's what was tied to my initial flare-ups as a young girl. I think there's lots of evidence now as well about what that time means in terms of your adolescence and the changes that are going on that can be stressful for the nervous system. My anxiety really came to a head, and I kind of looked back and said, I don't even remember why I'm doing this anymore. I just kind of followed one job to the next, and it just felt like the right thing to do. And yeah, I hit a wall. So I went on sort of a journey to try to figure out what my next thing would be, and I explored a whole bunch of different things. I I toured with the idea of becoming like a tour guide and I mean, oh my gosh, I went all over the place. And then ultimately got speaking with one of the a local Pilates teacher and they said, you love this work so much, like you obviously want to help people. I had been in the healthcare industry since the start of my career. So I did have a strong tie to health and I had thought about being a nurse, but I was, my stomach turned at this thought of putting a needle in someone's vein, so I like couldn't do that job. So she said, just give it a try and like the worst thing that happens is you decide you hate it. So I took a chance in 2017 and started my training with Balanced Body. It was terrifying. I was really intimidated. I felt like everybody was in a tiny little body and I just felt out of place, but I stuck with it. And then the first time that I did a student teaching, I just loved it. And then I decided to finish the whole thing and I left my corporate job and gave my notice a few months later. And yeah.
And now you have your studio. You're talking to me from Edinburgh. We'll talk in a moment about your journey to Scotland. But you obviously, I'm imagining you're working with people in pain, like a lot of us are. A good chunk of our work, our private work, tends to be that. Many clients arrive with fear, tension, stories. Like I always think they have like a metaphorical folder full of conditions and things that people have told them are wrong with them. How do we as teachers kind of cut through that and support them? How do we explain to other teachers maybe what is pain in its simplest terms and how can we empower our clients with the work that we do?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question because I've actually been working on a course for teachers called Cultivating Courage because I do think that this is an important conversation that we need to have because I mean, as I said, I was getting people walking into the studio telling me they had pain from my first like 2 days on the job. The Pilates industry has shifted a little bit since then, but I mean, for the longest time, the people who were going had been referred by a physio or a doctor or something, and so they heard it was good for XYZ. At its most basic level, pain is a signal from the brain. So it's a signal from the brain that something is a threat. Now, the next step is trying to figure out, is that threat real? Is it valid? Or is that threat just like a misjudged scenario? Like anything else, like you're walking down the street and you see a shadow and your heart races and your palms get sweaty because you think that maybe there's someone lurking in the shadows and it just turns out you like saw a cat or around here a fox or whatever. But your nervous system is reacting to those stimuli in a way that in a conditioned way based on your past experience. And so part of what happens as people are coming in with their folder, as you say, it's not just the fact that maybe they have a list of diagnoses. It's also the fact that they're carrying with them a whole bunch of experiences that have taught them about what their body is going to feel in certain situations. So it's very difficult to try to unpack that in a single class. And so I think we have to focus on what we know, which is essentially once you have the basics of information, once you've assessed somebody, you know what is safe and not safe for that person. And if you can speak kind of confidently about, I know your body is capable of this and kind of stick inside their kind of guardrails, you can say, based on once you get to know them in terms of what they're comfortable doing, you can keep them safe and also progress them towards whatever their goal is. It is a shame sometimes, even if people have imaging, and I don't know, it's doesn't seem as much of an issue here, but in the States, people get imaging all the time, and then they end up with all the scans, and then you end up having a conversation to say, yes, and I know that you have that, bulging disc or you have that degeneration in that joint or you have that labrum that's bothering you, but like you could take any random person off the street and stick them in a scan and they can have exactly what you're describing and have no pain. So that scenario by itself is not a 100% guarantee that you are going to have pain. Teaching that person to also experience things without pain symptoms and then helping them to recognize, hey, we just did that thing that you were saying was probably going to hurt you and it didn't hurt you. Like, what do you think about that? And so bringing their attention back to the places where they didn't actually have pain, you have to sort of coax the person to learn through their own body. There's some amount of education when it comes to pain science, but in general, it's just standing over people and educating them isn't the answer either, because obviously we need to get them moving. So we have to sort of figure out this balance between helping people understand that the pain isn't something that they need to fear, but also making sure that they are getting their money's worth and they're moving their body and getting a good exercise when they come. So that is sort of a challenge because you have to kind of play both roles.
You said about, when you meet someone and for the first time and you're chatting to them about their experience and what's going on, and then you're trying to formulate a session for them that allows them to kind of move within the constraints they've got at this moment. How do we ask the right questions to understand what's going on, not just maybe from a movement perspective, but maybe also from like their beliefs, how they feel, how this is getting in their way? This is a question that comes up a lot with teachers that I work with. There's often a lot of talking in those first sessions. Is that the same with you, DK?
Yeah, I mean, I always have some kind of a first session that doesn't involve very much movement at all. That's just mostly discussion.
And I think that's so important to share because I have teachers going, yeah, but they've paid for Pilates. I was like, they'd go to a class if they wanted that. In the UK, we get 10 minutes with a GP. So often clients can feel amazed that they get to talk to you. So it's great that you shared that because I'm the same. And actually, what I see in my studio is the teachers who do that, the clients come back again and again and again. The teachers who get people moving too quickly, I guess there's no way that you can plan a session for them because you don't understand them. So what kind of things are you asking them?
So I mean, I'm asking them, I mean, there's apart from the basic, screening questions about safety and stuff like that. I'm asking them why they're here. What have they heard about Pilates? Like what do they think it is? What makes them want to move? As I have sort of a particular interest in making sure the space is inclusive for all bodies. So I will push on anyone who says that they're there because they want to lose weight or they think that they're going to change their body because that's not really what this is for. And also, I just don't think that in of itself is a goal that's going to get someone to the point that I want them to be at. So then I'll usually say, well, what does that mean for you? Like, are you doing that because there's some activity or there's some aspect of your life you're not getting 100% out of that you feel that having it, augmenting your body will somehow do that? I am very honest and I say, this is not really a weight loss exercise like approach. At this point, but people don't usually say that to me because they've read my website, but so I kind of try to get that stuff out of the way.
We're so similar. Like we're not an aesthetically driven brand at all, our studio, very anti that. But it comes up every now and again. So it's interesting to hear how you handle that. I try and handle it that way as well. The question of what does that mean to you? I think you can ask that question about anything. I've got this shoulder. Well, what does that mean to you? I think often hearing people's explanations, I think that's a really good question that you've shared there to get people to go a little bit deeper in how they feel about whatever they've said. Because sometimes people just relay what they've been told by some medical professional, which maybe isn't the core of how they feel.
I have to bite my tongue when people come in and they're telling me all of their, oh, my right glute doesn't work and my left knee is really wonky and I have a squidgy ankle or something. And I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Exactly what does that mean? What is the sensation that you've experienced? Are you experiencing a sensation or is it just something that someone outside of you told you that now you've sort of pathologized your gait because you've decided that you walk funny? So there is a lot of trying to unpack that and just I'm trying to help people come into the movement experience at face value. Just experience the movement in your body and then register what that experience is. And that's all we're here for. We're not trying to be 10 years down the road. We're not trying to be 10 years behind. We're just trying to be in this body right now and experiencing the movement. And then I ask a lot of questions about, what does this feel like for you? Where does it feel like the work is coming from? Oh, I don't like that. Why don't you like that? Oh, it feels uncomfortable. Uncomfortable how? And I like really push people. So there's a lot of back and forth in that first session. It's not just like straight conversation necessarily. We'll have some straight conversation in the beginning, but then I'll have some sort of standard movements I take people through that allow me to talk to them, but also to assess some specific things. And then I'll ask questions while we're talking. And, my favorite thing is when someone tells me they don't like something or they don't want to do it or they're afraid of it, is I ask them what they think the worst case scenario is. What's the worst thing that's going to happen if you do this? What do you think? And you get really interesting information when you ask that because either they'll say, oh, it's too silly. I don't want to tell you. And I'm like, well, this is the place to say those things, or, they'll say something that will kind of reveal something about what they fear. And as far as I'm concerned, from a movement with pain perspective, the fear is the sort of pathway into all the information about what is underlying kind of their limitations when it comes to movement. And so I'm trying to kind of get to those places. And, you know, I especially pay attention to the things that people say that they're very dismissive about. Because a lot of times their actual hopes and goals will come up in a, well, it's silly, but I mean, I really just have always wanted to visit the pyramids in Egypt or something, some sort of bucket list thing. And I don't let those kinds of offhanded comments go away because I really feel like they come up from the heart most of the time. And then you say, "Well, that sounds like an awesome idea. Why wouldn't you do that?" And then again, it's like that, like, pulling the thread a little bit until you get to the, "Well, I had to climb a difficult staircase in so such and such a place, and then I tore my ACL, and now I'm afraid to go downstairs." And then you get all the stuff, and then you're like, "Okay, now I see what we're dealing with. Now I see our path. Like, let's actually try to find some kind of intermediate challenge for you, which is probably going to be step up on the chair, and then work towards that, and then that can be such a much more meaningful achievement for that person because you've tied it to like a life goal than just randomly giving them jump board or something."
And what you're talking about really is getting these people to notice how they feel and communicate it, because I think what you typically see is people who've been in pain a long time can barely tell you if something feels good or bad. And so I like the way that you frame not just how does that feel? Because sometimes people will be like, good, not so good. Then actually asking a secondary question. And it sounds like from your experience, that's where some of this interesting sort of juice comes up that then you can work with. And I really agree with you on, I think if you can find their true goals, that like lifestyle goals, and use this work to help them, they will then make that commitment as well, and they will see the value in it and make this, it's not just about doing exercise, is it? It's very much about using movement to, I always joke, people don't do Pilates to be good at Pilates, they do it to be good at their life. And it's linking it back into that.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it really comes full circle because I think there are just people out there who have decided, I'm not a sports person, I'm not an exercise person. And I think helping people understand that, every minute that you invest in practicing or preserving the functional movements that are essential to your independence will mean a more fulfilling life in the long run. This is not just fluffy aesthetic stuff. This is real movement for life.
And what sort of shifts could teachers make in order to make the experience feel safer for clients?
Well, that's challenging because I think it depends on if you're talking about in a group setting or in a one-to-one setting. In a one-to-one setting, I think that it's a little bit easier to adjust for that because you can sort of use props, or you can use tactile cues, or you can be really responsive with a person and you can really push them to their edge a little bit better. Doing that in a group situation is a little bit more challenging. If we're talking about a population in pain, then ultimately we want to get them to focus on the things that they can do really well and the ways in which they're really strong. So I'm really careful about not using like critical wording in my classes, whether group or individual. So to kind of remark on the things that people are doing well, or to kind of to give a correction in a way that feels like, if you want to get more out of this exercise, lengthen your spine, rather than sounding like you have bad posture. Like, I do feel like there's this kind of almost punitive way of talking to people that can become very easy to do. And I see this in physiotherapy too. And like, this is what goes back to what I was saying about how somebody comes in and thinks they don't know how to walk or their glutes don't know how to work. We can be careful to just make sure that we're encouraging people to see their bodies in a positive light, because you have to work from the assumption that everything in our environment is set up to tell us that our bodies are no good. And that's because it's very lucrative to make everybody believe that their body is no good. And so we're working upstream anyway. And so, especially when I have a bunch of middle-aged women that I'm working with who I know are probably already fighting that feeling, I want to say the things that are going to be really empowering and are going to kind of touch on their sense of accomplishment, no matter what the scenario is. And then in general, I don't make the moving platform more unstable than it needs to be for them to learn something. And I definitely see a lot of dynamic classes being structured around, how exciting can I make it, on the reformer? And I'm not in it for the like roller coaster version of the reformer. Like that's just me. So I think it depends on there's like a physical safety element and then there's sort of that psychological safety. And we have to be thinking about the two of them.
I liked what you said though as well about how we might push somebody in a private versus a class. I think that's actually a really interesting point because I remember the thing that came to my mind. I remember this client came in and she said, like, I can't lift my arm above my head. If I lift my arm above my head, XYZ happens. And, she was in her like mid 30s. And we did some movement with her, lots of talking, like you said. And then I kind of just got this sense of I'm going to do supine scaps on the trapeze table because she was in a place that she could move. And then we went into the overhead piece. And I think this is what makes the equipment so special because the equipment in itself can feel very, very safe and can get people moving in a way that isn't built into those patterns that are very fixed in their mind. So suddenly, her arms are above her head. She's doing some scapular glides. She brings it down. She's doing all this. Let her do it. And I said, "Do you realize you've brought your arms above your head?" "No, no, no, I haven't. I can't do that." "No, but you have." She came in the next week and she said it was just like almost an instant change where something had shifted and she suddenly realized that how she believed things to be hadn't been. And whereas if you try to do that kind of approach in a group class when someone said you couldn't do that and you're not right next to them in case you need to shift it or get out, like that would be really inappropriate to do actually in a group class. I thought that's a really good distinction of how you work so much differently in a private to a group class. It's something that I talk to students about, like a private shouldn't be a private class. It should be a completely different experience where you're really understanding that person, getting to know them, hearing, asking questions like you said, but also sensing, I guess, and seeing what's possible and showing them what is possible, but in a way that they feel safe. That same thing done in a group class just wouldn't have felt safe for her, I don't think.
So I love that example for a lot of reasons. It's a perfect example of how we use the Pilates equipment to achieve things with a person in pain that is special to our craft because you changed her relationship to gravity and you use the spring in an assistive way. I'm assuming that the bar had a spring on it. We can actually unload someone's kind of gravity weight by adding a spring. And then they're not feeling like they're flexing against gravity because they're on their back, but also because they're getting the assist. And so you allow that person to go through a pain free range of motion and helped the brain learn, oh, I can do this pain free over my head. And so then it sounds like she was able to successfully mimic that once she got out of it. Sometimes that's all it takes is being able to go through the range of motion, even if the relationship to gravity is different, even if you've had to assist it with a spring, but you've actually gone through it. And then the brain can sort of adjust its understanding. And that is, I think, that's Pilates magic.
It is Pilates magic, and you mentioned that as well when you were talking about group classes, about why is there this obsession with making everything as light or as heavy when actually if you really understand the springs and it takes depth of learning and it takes time, there's a reason we pick a spring. Like we've got this client and he just goes off piste all the time. And one day I pulled him aside and I said, "Listen, how many years have you trained to decide what spring to put on? Because I've spent years learning. And so if I say it needs to be on this spring, like one red spring, and you're putting it on three red springs because you think that makes it better, like I can't teach you if you're going to do that. So the springs are important, aren't they? Like enough to feel what we're talking about and have the support and the feedback. Also, how the equipment, like you said, allows you to change your relationship to gravity. I mean, that's the magic. That's what nothing else does. I think that's the special nature of Pilates and why so many people feel so good from it.
I also think that, and over the years, I've more been leaning towards teaching in groups so that people manage their own springs. Because I agree with you. Like if I tell you, red and yellow or whatever, like I mean it for some reason. But also, if you've been working with me for 6 months in a class and I say, put on your long stretch springs, I expect you to remember what your long stretch springs are. Like we also need to teach a little bit of agency into people because, a lot of times there's variability, especially when you're using the spring to offload a person's weight. We're going to take all kinds of different springs for something like long stretch series. So I think that part of the way that we do safety is to actually give more agency to the client and to say, this is what you should feel. If your spring is too heavy, it's going to feel like you're going to get ejected from the machine. If it's too light, it feels like you're on ice and it's going to slide out from under you. So you're going to make adjustments according to that. This is lighter than this and this is lighter than that. And then you kind of work with them and then say, oh, Mike, and then I'll be like, okay, now look down and these are your springs. So next time when I say a long stretch series, these are your springs. And that is also, I think, not just helps people to self manage, but it is a safety thing because they are learning their relationship to the machine and not being super dependent on an outside person. And that's when you can kind of mindlessly kind of change something and not really be paying attention.
And that's a really good point around getting people to take ownership for themselves. You talked before about inclusivity in studios and, a weight neutral environment. What does that look like in a Pilates studio and why is it important?
So, I mean, it's important because the mass majority of people are not in a tiny body. And so I think that we need to just in general be making all spaces welcoming to all size bodies. Also, because Pilates, I think, just has a reputation of being dancing adjacent, I guess, or very dancer oriented. And so there is a certain physique that I think gets associated. And I find that it's an accessible exercise modality for a reason. It minimizes joint strain. It can be really comfortable into old age in a way that like maybe cardio kickboxing isn't. And so I think we need to be making it accessible to people. I mean, what that looks like is everything from, figuring out how people get through the door to making sure that your seating does not have, like limited spacing that makes a larger person, unable to sit in that chair. It also means talking kind of openly about the inclusivity of the studio and also refraining from using aesthetic oriented cueing, which guilty as charged. Like as an early teacher, I definitely said, let's do our tricep extensions so that we can have taut summer arms or whatever stupidity used to come out of my mouth. But, I think that we can very easily just slide into language that can be really discriminating for people who don't feel like they have access to certain things. It also means having the right props, having a reformer wedge or, other things that allow a person to kind of lay back comfortably. And there's so many assistive things out there now that can be added to reformers that can make certain exercise is more accessible. And it also means that we need to educate ourselves because there's some really fantastic teachers out there who specialize in this work. And I think that that should be part of our core curriculum, to be honest with you, if we want to make sure we're able to be accessible for all bodies.
As well as studio owners, I talked about this in a previous episode, and the clip went up and it went absolutely viral on TikTok, where I was saying, as studio owners, we need to be more inclusive, even in our marketing. Like, we need to be showing more of a range of people in our photography. And it was so interesting. I had hundreds and hundreds of comments. I went back to everyone. The majority of them were people saying, I'm a mid sized person and I went into the studio and I felt really intimidated. It made me feel uncomfortable. And that's not good enough. I went back to everyone. I was like, please try another studio. The basis of this practice is not that at all. But you sort of touched upon it earlier. I think 5 years ago, definitely 10 years ago, if people came to Pilates, 99% it was because something hurt. They came because something hurt. They stayed because they loved how it made them feel. They also loved that, you do see your body shift. You do see your body feel better, and that has an effect. Now Pilates has got very sexy. Of course, it's bringing in people who are not in pain and they just want to come because of how it makes them feel. And of course, the easiest way to market that is around the aesthetics. Yet that's not the core of what this is. So I think, it's also getting these people through your door at a studio by the way, the language that you use on your website, your socials. Sometimes our photography can be the teachers, and I get it because we want the moves to look good, but the teachers often aren't reflective of maybe a real class. We've started doing this actually like once every couple of months. We put on a class for free. We tell people we're photographing it. We bring in a professional photographer and we do photography for social and video. That is real classes. And anyone could come. So if you're not comfortable, you don't have to. But it's been really nice and the clients have loved it actually. I want to sort of feel like how can you showcase the reality of what your studio looks like inside so that it brings the people that you want to attract in. But as some people said to me on these comments on this TikTok, I think some of these some of these studios did not want to attract me in. And that just makes me sad.
And I mean, to be fair, the whole fitness industry is like that. I mean, that's not unique to Pilates. I mean, there's plenty of times that I've gone to yoga studios and felt that way. Honestly, any yoga studio that is doing a hot yoga like has never had a perimenopausal woman in their lives. There's nothing I want to be less than hotter than I already am. Thank you very much. So yeah, there's lots of places I think where you can feel that. I think Pilates is getting a lot of attention because, like you said, there's like a sexiness to it that I think is making its way into media. But, obviously our marketing can be improved. I mean, I'm a member of a group called the Body Positive Fitness Alliance that's, I think, mostly in North America. And they explicitly have a library of photos that we can all access that are, a wide range of bodies and also persons with disabilities and things like that, which I think is a great initiative that we should definitely be expanding. The manuals we're given have tiny little people in them. So, I mean, we need also training on how to take things like the roll up and make sure that we're teaching it in a way that any person in the room can do something that feels successful. So I think that's what people mean when they say that they felt like they weren't wanted there is because probably visually also, but it's also being taught in such a way that didn't feel accessible to them. It felt like it was really directed at a certain body type or a certain level of ability that they didn't meet.
It's a good point because you don't know what it's like if that's not your body type, you don't know what it's like. Like I even think about this, all my pre and postnatal training did not equip me for really understanding what it was like to be pregnant until I was pregnant myself. So I do get that, but it's about having some understanding of things. Like a client mentioned this to me the other day. She's a larger lady and she said, getting into feet and straps is quite tricky for me. And we had a really good chat about it. I thought, I hadn't really thought about that. She said, your teachers need to be a little bit more aware of how to cue us into this because we can absolutely get into it. But the kind of put your feet into straps when I've never done it felt quite uncomfortable for me because I couldn't figure it out as easily as felt that other people were. And I thought that was a really good point. And I also think sometimes we just learn from our clients as well, don't we? And going back to what you said earlier, it's also about having these conversations and with the clients that you feel like you can do to try and understand them better and how can we make this better for them so that they can come in and have a really great experience.
It's also about the nature of the studios that we all train in because, you know, I remember the feeling of doing my test out and being like, "Oh, I'm at the end of my training." And then you very quickly realize that you are at the beginning of your training. And I think making sure that there's that culture of continuous learning and we're not going to know all the things all the time. We can't, but we need to know where to go to get it. And we also need to have mentors who are encouraging us to have an open mind and an inquisitive, kind of perspective to go to the research to make sure that what you're doing is based on evidence and not just, the latest fad. And I think that we also need to educate the population on how to locate those studios so that people are getting the most out of the experience because there are going to be ones that are super trendy and are not really interested in that, and that's fine. I know you often ask about the future facing sort of side of the industry, and I do think that there's going to need to be this sort of separation of sorts where sort of Pilates as the like fun, trendy gym thing will probably stay, but we have to figure out those of us who are really committed to our craft as a career, who are deep in the research and educating ourselves and want to build up the next generation of teachers, like how do we, or sort of clinical adjacent, like how do we differentiate ourselves in such a way that people know what they're looking for and where to get it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a good point around the differences that are out there and not fighting it. Like, I enjoy that kind of class sometimes. Like, I do. It's fun, but I know what I'm going to. But it's also for those people who are more drawn to this kind of work to understand there will always be a need for this and they don't have to be mutually exclusive. Like, they can both live together. If you go back to the world of pain and working with people in pain, one of the things you talk about in your book is around like a lot of people get taught, and you sort of said this before with various professionals that they might have seen, like, make sure you don't do that. Make sure you don't bend down. Make sure you don't do this. That's also part of it, isn't it? And how we as teachers can use our cueing and our chats, I guess, to get people to realize there is nearly always more potential than what they've been told before.
Yes, I mean, I think also this also comes from a place of not wanting to slam any other profession, but just from my own experience of being told I had SI joint dysfunction and, problems with my arches anyway, I've been told all the things are wrong. That may even be true, but like ultimately the body is a very adaptable organism. Some of the things that we learn, they would consider it sort of a negative adaptation, I guess, or an issue is actually an adaptation that's allowing you to go on with your life and stand and walk and do things. And so not all adaptations in the body, even if it leads to some asymmetry, is a bad thing. But like you said, I think ultimately helping people trust their own strength, helping them kind of challenge themselves with something, realize they can do the thing, and then kind of hang on to the sense of achievement of challenging themselves and trusting their bodies is really important for, getting them to their full movement potential.
And the language we use as teachers is really important, but the language we use to ourselves, whether it's literally ourselves or ourselves as clients, is really important, isn't it? But I was also a person who had all the things wrong. We always had prolapse discs, big chronic neck pain. And I remember being like, this is my bad shoulder. Like, this is my bad shoulder. And I was working with someone and he was like, you can't use that word because then it will always be your bad shoulder. You got to, and I remember vividly feeling like I didn't even know how to describe this because that's all I had known. And it was a really interesting journey just to even have words and be like, "Oh, okay, right." And this blows kind of people's minds a little bit, but it really works, doesn't it? Getting people to even reframe the language they use around their own self. Like, it can be an injured shoulder, it can be a shoulder that's had some problem. Like, you can be factual about it, but we don't want to kind of give it a label and have it kind of be part of your identity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's also a point in time. And if there's anything that I've learned, it's that for your entire lifespan, your body can change. So, it may feel not great today. And of course, I would make the person use very descriptive language on what they mean. But, you have no idea what it'll be like a week from now. And that's just something that the nervous system does. And I think that's also part of what being a person with anxiety has taught me because I'm constantly having to remind myself, like, you're feeling afraid right now, but an hour from now, even, it's going to pass. And I think that that's just a function of how our nervous system interacts with the world. And that's where pain shows up as well. And so I think it's one of the things I see people fall into, and even myself, if I have a flare up, it's very easy to think this pain state that I'm in this moment is the one that's going to last forever. And so even if I ask someone, okay, so that's your bad shoulder. So what things do you want to do that your shoulder is preventing you from doing? And then we have that conversation. And then I'll say, okay, of the things that you listed, what's the one you like the most? And then I'll say, have you ever done it without pain? And try to get the person to come up with a scenario where they did do the thing they want to do without pain. And then say, okay, well, what was different then? Was that pre-injury or was that just a good day? Or, oh, it usually turns out I was on vacation and my boss wasn't calling me or something. We just, as organisms, we evolved because we learned to fear. We were not the people who just stayed on the savannah when the tiger was, growling. We ran away and we're here to tell the tale. But as a result, we have a tendency to have a sensitized response to some stimuli. And so I think putting that in perspective and helping people recognize that pain is actually information that is very beneficial to you. In the moments when you need it, it is there to let you know that there is a problem. But sometimes it just is like that smoke alarm that goes off because the batteries need to be replaced, and it actually is not a sign of anything being wrong at all. And we have to figure out how to befriend that and appreciate that it is a good functioning nervous system. It is not something broken in you. And in the meantime, you just did a killer squat. So you're also really strong.
Sometimes I remember I had surgery on my ankle, and that leg actually is so brilliant at balancing because at the time it was before I was a teacher. physio was very, well, let's work on the leg that you've injured. So that leg actually got really good at balancing and the other leg's not so good. And often I remember that when I'm working with clients to be like, can you see how your bad leg's actually brilliant at this and your good leg's actually rubbish at that? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So maybe we just need to kind of reframe it. And what I loved about your book, honestly, was that I thought this is the sort of book that we should give to our clients genuinely. So it's a good book for us as teachers. It was interesting. I kind of felt like I knew a lot of this. It was nice to hear your story. But I think what it does a brilliant job of, and I really mean it, a brilliant job of explaining this because it can take time to come at this from different angles. And you have, your own experiences in there, experiences of clients. I gave it to my husband. I said, "You need to read this." My husband, like, I preach this stuff at him, and sometimes I don't think he truly is allowing himself to understand his own beliefs and how they may not be serving him. And I think it does such a great job, for us as teachers to read it. But for me, how I see this being used is we would give it to our clients and say, "This is a book you should read to understand why for 20 years you've had a bad back, but you don't need to have a bad back forever. It doesn't own you, you know?"
Yeah, I mean, we talk about that a lot in the sort of circles of folks who are interested in Pilates and pain because the main work that a person with chronic pain has to do to get to the place where they're operating in their movement journey where they want to be is work they have to do outside the studio. And it is difficult to have that conversation with them, like you said. I mean, how many of us have had that first client come in, client session, and they have pain and they try something, it freaks them out, and then they never come back. And it's often because of a whole bunch of stuff in their history and baggage that they're carrying in the door that you can't see. So if we can have them doing some work outside of the sessions, I mean that would be the ideal situation I think for me with the book, especially since it's structured in such a way that you could sort of be like read chapter 1 and then come back and we'll work on whatever, and allow them to go through that journey alongside because there's a lot of things in the book that basically talk about, okay, now you're going to define your program according to what actually you feel like you can do on a day where you're having a flare up and what you would like to challenge yourself on a non flare up day. If they're doing that in partnership with a Pilates teacher that they're working with, that would be the ideal scenario because then they're able to sort of test that out with somebody. That would be perfect.
And so now you're in Bonnie, Scotland, in the where we were just talking about, we're kind of getting into the depths of winter. Tell me about that journey. How are you finding, Scotland and I guess, Pilates in Scotland, is it different to what you were doing in America?
I think there's a few things. So first of all, I was running a studio, a commercial studio in Boston. And, most US cities are pretty saturated with Pilates. And so I think we've gotten over that initial panic of, oh my gosh, all of the big Pilates reformer studios are moving in and my business is going to go under. Spoiler alert, nobody's business went under. Everybody got busier because the reality is most people don't know what Pilates is. I was actually so I'm doing this is a little bit of a sidebar, but I'm currently a part-time grad student. I'm doing a master's in clinical exercise physiology. And we had to do an assignment in class the other day where we had to determine the metabolic equivalence of certain kinds of exercise. So essentially, how much energy is required to do exercise. And I said, "You have 14 different kinds of walking on here and 12 different like ones for gardening and Pilates is not on this list." And she goes, "Yeah, but there's yoga, right?" And I was like, okay, that to me is just like a perfect example of the fact that people, even in the fitness world, in the sports science world, don't really know what Pilates is. So I think that when I talk to some teachers here, and of course, I'm still very new, so I don't want to make a broad brush about the whole country, but I feel like there's some of that growing and like worry that, there's a lot of reformer studios popping up. It's getting really popular. And so those of us who have put in a ton of hours and money and passion into training, really deeply with the work are somehow going to become irrelevant. And I just, because I watched that happen already, it's just not true. And I'm just excited that there's more studios popping up because, so long as people don't get hurt, ultimately it just means more people are going, what is this Pilates thing?
And it's great that you shared that because it's so true. I have American friends and they say this. And, if that big studio is spending a load of money on paid advertising, they are advertising Pilates. And that person's still going to go and Google Pilates and they're going to still try and find a studio that resonates with them, that is local to them, that has the right times that suit them. So this is what I hear as well is don't panic, it will be fine. There's enough people to go around, and actually that's what you hear time and time again is actually everyone gets busier, not less busy.
And I do think so. I mean, I see obviously a lot of reformer only studios, and I'm a huge fan of using the whole set of equipment as a system. And so I think, my initial impression was that there wasn't really a lot of studios that were kind of doing it like that. I do think that they're tucked away. Like, I think people are doing it in their homes like me, or they're, in smaller studios. I also think that there's a real need to fill the pipeline with talented teachers. To me, there feels like there's a real gap in that, and having teacher education programs that go through the whole system with all the pieces of equipment, and figuring out how to make sure people understand that reformer Pilates is one slice of the pie, but the whole thing has a lot more pieces to it.
It's interesting for me. I have 3 studios. My first studio is a full equipment studio because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do a lot of private work. When I first opened, it was mainly just me. And then we created like a group class where you work through a bit like a circuit. And pre-COVID, we were like so busy. The finances of it were a little tricky. So I had this kind of idea that we were the first reformer studio. And the reformer studio, really, if I'm honest, bulks up the business for sure. So we opened another studio, tried to do it well, which we have done. But what's been interesting for me, I think, is that with this boom in reformer Pilates, struggling to fill that equipment circuit class in the same way because it can feel a little slower to get going than, say, a group reformer where you're all doing the same. However, when people get it, they literally never leave. Definitely been a challenge is, reformer is a little bit, which is why the reformer is such a brilliant tool. It's a bit more accessible. You can come in, you can kind of have a class and keep moving for an hour, even as a beginner, whereas kind of moving between pieces of equipment and trying to learn the equipment and how it's there. But I think once you get it, and what I see is that the comprehensively trained instructors do make the best reformer teachers because they've learnt the system. And even if they're just teaching the reformer or, one piece of equipment, even mat work as well, the same, they kind of can pull bits from other pieces of equipment and cues and ideas, even in the reformer. And they also are the teachers who are the most busy with privates, they kind of understand the system more. You touched upon the future in terms of body inclusivity, but where do you see the future, or what would you like to see from the future of Pilates and the education? Do you think we need more education around pain?
I think that we need more access to clinical training and conversations for people in the Pilates field who are interested in that. I think that we need to be considered alongside our physiotherapy counterparts. I think it's very difficult to access those opportunities and those conversations. And I'm not saying everybody needs to do that because, like you said, I mean, if you're really excited about teaching a super dynamic reformer class to super fit people, I mean, maybe that's not going to be interesting to you. And I've tried to explain this to folks, and that is not specifically a UK problem. I mean, this is a challenge in the States as well, where I say, you may not want me to come to your training, but when I tell you that I am the first point of care for people with chronic pain all the time, because they're very frustrated with the medical system and they're just not really sure where to go and they're not getting enough time with their GP or whatever, and they just come to me and say, I have all of this pain. What do I do? I want to be able to refer them to the right provider that they can get if they need it, so that they can get seen. But ultimately, like what we're seeing in the research is that movement is medicine. And so we are delivering a service that is life changing. And so I would like for us to be able to, at least for those of us who want it, to have access to those conversations, to be a designated referral pathway for GPs and others who have someone with chronic pain or movement limitations, or if the physio clinics are full or whatever. And I do think that there's a whole lot of training out there. I mean, there's training related to pain that would be beneficial. There's people doing brilliant things related to neuro rehab and spinal cord injury, neuroplasticity for Alzheimer's and dementia, the whole realm related to elderly and aging. I mean, we could have a huge impact there. I work as a physiotherapy assistant in a care home. I would love to have a Pilates studio in there. Can you imagine? We would be able to deliver so much good stuff. So I just feel like there's lots of ways for us to influence people's health in a substantive way. And I'm not sure which conversation needs to happen for us to be able to have a pathway to being considered legitimate in that arena.
I think the statistic is by 2030, there will be more people over 50 than under 50 for the first time ever in the UK. maybe even worldwide. That's an amazing position for us to be in because what we really do help is longevity. And, you have to use it or lose it. We all know that. I think what you also said earlier about you do the training, you get the certificate, you work towards, think, right, I know everything. And then you suddenly realize, no, this is the start. And it's maybe not to think that this training needs to be in your initial training, but it's I think partly why I'm doing the podcast is I want people to understand the world that is out there and the extra trainings that they do exist and to be open to them and to try and think of the kind of work that you're interested in. A friend of mine is a nurse. Her job is to help the elderly stay in their homes and not go into care homes. So she goes out to the homes and helps them. She says she meets all these people and they are on so many painkillers, so many. And no one has ever, and she's a big client at our studio. And she said, no one ever says to them, have you tried this exercise? And it's a very frustrating piece because there's not a lot of, from how I understand, this problem exists because there isn't sort of tried and tested studies that allow the medical profession to therefore be able to use it in the way that it can do.
There is research out there, though, to be fair. Like, the Pilates Method Alliance has assembled a ton of peer-reviewed literature related to Pilates.
I was at a conference and they were in the UK and they were talking about this, about, what the NHS in the UK needs, for example, for referrals. And I don't understand why somebody isn't trying to pull this together. And actually, this conversation I was listening to was really interesting. And it was saying we shouldn't be having the sort of movement world and the health world separate. They should be together because they need to be together for people to feel better in their bodies, have better lives, to put less pressure on the medical system and for it to work together. But it can feel quite disjointed. And in the UK, there is a training that you can do to get your GP referrals. But even that, I would say, isn't necessarily, people I know who've done it, it's not even the best training. It's a tick box exercise. There's such an opportunity there. I wonder who and how that piece is going to be put together because any of us who are doing this kind of work, we are seeing this transformation in these people who sometimes only find us by chance because somebody told them, as opposed to being guided maybe more professionally where they get stuck. Like you said, we often guide people back into a system. It's very good to have people that you trust to refer people back into. Like it's an ecosystem, isn't it, of working with different people and how we can kind of help people on their holistic health journey, really.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't want someone going to a physio forever and ever. Like, that's like your acute kind of, duration, and then I think of the work that I do as sort of the bridge from the acute or post-acute into kind of maintenance, and then maybe they injure themselves again, they go back in, but we need to create space for the folks who need that stuff. And I mean, it does help that in the States, there's the National Pilates Certification Program, which has sort of a consolidated body of certifications that we all take an exam for. There isn't really the equivalent here for comprehensive. So I mean, that can sort of help as like a body that can kind of advocate on behalf of the profession, but I mean, to be really honest, that's the main reason I'm going to be a clinical exercise physiologist, is to try to have access to that pathway and to be in those conversations about exercise as a clinical thing. But even the CEP role is not really widely understood across the industry here either. It's still kind of new to the UK. So I really feel like it's not just Pilates that's feeling that, other countries have a very, very well recognized. Australia, as an example, they have all kinds of folks who are doing essentially clinical exercise at some level where they've recognized that there is actually a clinical benefit to movement, and Pilates has a very special lane in that, and we just need to figure out how to get those pieces together into the system.
Yeah, in Australia, like physiotherapy and Pilates just go hand in hand. Every physiotherapist I've ever met who's Australian is also a very good Pilates teacher. DK, to end our conversation today, I want to ask some quick or quickish fire questions. What's your favorite Pilates exercise and why?
I am a huge fan of the chair in general, so I just really like to do step ups on the chair. I don't know, it's challenging. I appreciate the way that it really challenges my muscles, and it also makes me kind of change my kind of perception of what's around me and kind of the spring underneath my foot, and I like the balance of it.
Have you had a mentor that's kind of shaped the way that you teach?
I wouldn't point to anyone in particular. I have been really, so Another thing that I think is different here, at least my perception, we are expected to invest hundreds, even thousands of dollars in continuing education every year. And I've been really lucky, especially through Balanced Body, just incredible teachers. Yeah, I think all of their content is really good from a teaching perspective. I mean, I also went through the Movement Science Made Simple Advanced Movement Studies program, and so I have to give a shout out to Jeremy Lavador and Kara Reeser, who have incredible content and have been really contributed to my sense of empowerment to be inquisitive and to use evidence-based teaching.
And DK, if people want to work with you, find out more about you, how can they do that?
The best way is movementremedies.org, which is my website. You can, of course, find me on the evil Instagram, although I try not to be on it too much, at movement_remedies. Yeah, and you can email me at dk@movementremedies.org.
Thank you so much. It has been fabulous to talk on about so many topics with you today. So I'm so grateful to have
Same.
you here.
It's been a pleasure to chat with you, Nick. Thank you.
A huge thank you to Dana for sharing her story and wisdom with us today. I think this episode will resonate with so many teachers, especially anyone who works with clients in pain or fear, or who wants to build a more inclusive, compassionate studio environment. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please follow Beyond the Reformer wherever you listen. Share this episode with a friend or a colleague. And I love when you send me your thoughts on Instagram. It's always great to hear from you. Until next time, keep teaching, keep learning, and remember, you're meant to move.